My name is Lori Tazio. I am the president and COO of RJ Julia's. And so nice to have you all here. So nice to have Kathleen here back in a hometown visit, which is lucky for us, that we have this great event to kick off a book tour for you. So normally I would do a traditional introduction, but it seems that many of you know Kathleen, and I thought maybe we would just dive right in by you telling us a little bit about what brought you, tell us as much as you want, but what brought you to writing this book and what it meant to you to do this.
Welcome everyone. I'm so glad to see you. It meant everything. So I grew up in a family where authors were our rock stars. My great aunt Louisa May Alcott wrote Little Women. Anyone heard of that? And my mom, Eleanor, who's here, was an editor at Reader's Digest for 30 plus years. And so I just remember as a little girl, she'd come home every night and she'd have these metal baskets that would be piled sky high with books and magazines. And that was her nightly reading. And then I'd kind of tiptoe out in the middle of the night and she'd still be reading into the wee hours. So, I'm a business person first and foremost. I am not a writer. I have a lot of talented writers, by proxy in the family and by extension. But I really did my best to put pen to paper and really think about what I've learned in business and how do I create the blueprint, the manual I wished I'd had when I was starting out, when I knew nothing and had no entrepreneurs in the family and no entrepreneurial network and just felt woefully alone and was kind of putting this whole thing together, bubblegum scotch tape as a very elaborate decoupage project. It was not good. But I did my best and that's the spirit of this book and why we're here.
So when you were younger, were you the paper route or the Girl Scout cookies or the lemonade stand? Like what interested you to move forward in business?
Ooh, I talked to Mark Randolph, who founded Netflix, and he had told me that candy arbitrage is an early indicator for being an entrepreneur. And I loved, this concept of like, you buy something low and you sell it for more than you made it for was mind-boggling for me. So I had something called the Snack Attack Pack in high school. Very cool. I was very cool. And I would rap on the morning loudspeaker, like, come in, pick up your Snack Attack Pack. Your hunger won't be coming back, or something atrocious. And that was my first kind of taste of starting a business. And I fell in love with it almost as a creative pursuit. It was just this really fun game.
That's great. I love to hear that. I love to hear the stories of what kind of starts out, the burning, desire to do something. My brother laughs at me that when I used to lend him money, I used to make him sign IOU.
Well, I knew I wasn't going to make it as a singer, so.
Forever maybe though, I don't know. So I made some notes and I have some, stickies throughout the book. So just bear with me as I kind of go through some of these. But so writing a book like this, determining the structure, and you said you're not a writer. So but you've broken it out into a section 1 and section 2. And so how did that come about and what made you do that? Because there's chapters underneath each section and then the building blocks and all of that. So how did you determine setting out, what the book was going to be structured?
My frustration, I never went to business school, so I learned on my feet. And my frustration with everything kind of being self-taught was everything was built on skill set and you've got to be really good, right? I was consulting for Fortune 100 businesses. So you have to understand brand strategy and marketing and financials and pitching. All of that is kind of, expected. What I did not realize and only came to know in starting a business is that as I was doing this work, I really did not have the right mindset to be resilient and to go the distance. And so I started working with personal growth coaches, business coaches, wealth coaches, pretty much anyone I could. That's where all my disposable income went. It did not go into handbags. It went into coaches. And I really wanted to learn what is it to become a peak performer. And so once I started doing that work, it had this very demonstrable impact on my business. And my business took off because my mindset, all of a sudden, I became like mentally very strong. And so the heart of the book is to start there, get your mindset right, and then work on skill sets and what you need to unleash your dream.
Yeah, and you lay it out so nicely. And, for those of you that will be, getting the book, hopefully all of you are affiliated, it's laid out in a way that you've got the chapters with sort of the goal of the chapter, and then there's building blocks, and there's sort of like mini chapters, and then there's examples, so I love that you actually put some of your personal people that you've worked with or people that you've learned about, kind of at the end of every chapter, it's like a little glimpse into what somebody else went through.
Thank you for that. I had to also look up a lot of building terms. So I was constantly Googling how do you build a house and then what comes next. And because I did want it to kind of methodically stack.
Yeah.
And I kept the process of writing the book was actually, and my mom was an editor before I sold the book. Thank you. That's in part why I was able to get the book deal I was able to get, because it had already been, I wrote the entire book and had already edited it before I took it to my agent and before I sold it. But I kept deconstructing the book and starting again because I really wanted to make sure everything stacked on itself.
So there's a line here that I just loved. And it says, if you are this successful doing work you don't love, imagine how successful you'd be doing work you do love. I definitely resonate with that. And when we'll get more into like I have daughters that I want to mention because of this, but I remember they took their first jobs and they hated it, and I said, well, you got to do what you don't like, so that you don't ever want to do that again. So tell us an example of something like that for you. Like what brought that to fruition for you?
Yeah, I did all, some of you can probably relate to in your own lives or your children's lives. I did all the right expected things. I got the corporate job. I worked 80-hour weeks. I was constantly gunning for the next promotion. And I remember this night I was having pizza with a friend. It was this place that had this awesome pizza called the Shroom Town, 4 different types of mushrooms and this truffle sauce. I'm looking at you and you love food. And I had it smeared all over my face. It was just like I was drowning myself in the pizza for not all the right reasons. And this friend looked at me deadpan, was kind of just taking it all in, how like messy it all was, and said, you look kind of half dead. Like I was like pale, I was pasty, I was like clearly had been underground for a while. I hadn't seen daylight and no spark, no joy. And I walked home. It was one of those glistening nights in New York City where kind of the pavement is reflecting the light, and it's just, I walked 40 some odd blocks. And I had this quote by Tamara Keeves, who's a amazing Harvard professor, if you're this successful doing what you don't love, imagine how successful you'd be doing what you do love. And right, like you sometimes, and that haunted me, like that phrase haunted me until I had the courage to leave. And it wasn't this magnificent leap, which I want people to understand that's okay. I like slithered into my next role. Like I just left because I just realized I couldn't keep doing something that was so out of alignment with the spirit of the woman that I knew lived inside.
And how long did it take for that flip the switch?
Over a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you know, or at least have like the sense, or I know you had the hope, but if it's going to get better, like what kept you going? A year's a long time.
Yeah, it felt like an eternity. I think we have these things called, little B breakdowns and big B breakdowns, which we'll talk about in more detail. But the lack of alignment and the gnawing that happens when something in your life is not right is something that unfortunately you can also sit with and tolerate for a really long time. And so that process just sometimes takes a while before the agitation, the pebble in the shoe grows agitating enough to finally say enough's enough. But it's a quiet moment. Usually it's not very brave.
So we could talk about the little B and the big B now, because it's in your chapter called Demolition, breaking down the breakthrough. And so can you explain what, big B and little b and the importance of that to you? Because I actually found that fascinating, how you broke it down and the importance of why you need to do it in order to grow.
Yeah, the concept of breakdown, I think there's this assumption that it means you're like this puddle on the floor that's melted down and needs to be avoided, or you're mentally unstable. And I really wanted to kind of just interrogate what that means. And so what I found in anyone who's really up to stuff is you're going to have these breakdowns. And sometimes they're big B breakdowns, which are these cataclysmic life events that blindside you. It's the divorce, it's someone you love dying, it's a gigantic pandemic. But those are those things that kind of bring you to your knees, right? That break you. And then you have these little B breakdowns, which is kind of what I described, which is the lack of alignment. Usually it's more internal driven, where just something in your life feels not quite right, but you don't know necessarily where to go from that. And the magic of that I found is that it's this really happy moment in life, because it indicates that a breakthrough is coming. Some breakthrough is coming for you. And the faster you surrender to the breakdown, you just acknowledge we're in the midst of a breakdown, something is happening, and you let those pieces stay on the floor without trying to pick them up, the faster the breakthrough will come for you. And that's the magic. And that's when you're being led to what it is you're meant to do next.
Yeah, sitting in the muck. I did a mindfulness thing, and the instructor was like, sit in the muck, sit there and feel it in order for you to come out of it. So I think you're describing it in a nicer way than muck. So, but
And hopefully that's something, I mean, can anyone relate to that kind of big B, little b? Anyone in a big B right now? I love a big B. Let's get the champagne out. It's good.
That it's knowing your values and virtues while you're going through the little B or the big. So what is it you really hold true to yourself? And knowing that so that you can walk through it.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's great.
It's clarifying.
Yeah, and so for those people, so someone who's not reading your book and is having, either a big B or a little B and doesn't know to sit through it. I mean, it's as a neighbor or a friend or a coworker, or what could we say to them besides go by, build like a woman, you're gonna get through this. But what would you recommend, to help just the common folk say to someone else?
So I have a little tool in the book called AID, and it's just helping someone acknowledge, it's just talking about it. Like, we keep so many of these things in private, and I think there's such beauty in bringing them out in the open and saying, okay, I can see you're in the midst of a breakdown. What's going on? I mean, this is a shorthand my team and I constantly use. I use it with clients. Like, we'll say we're having breakdowns with each other, and it's this great shorthand for us to really communicate and support each other. And then you acknowledge, you identify what's breaking down, and then the fastest way to get out of it is to declare what you're going to build next. So it could be the smallest of small things, but there's something that happens when we're then in that state of action that allows us to leave that breakdown behind, or feel like we're leaving it behind.
And just so there's a footnote, which I love the footnote. It was like, if you're really having a breakdown, get medical help.
My editor made me.
I was like, that was brilliant. I mean,
Really?
I chuckled. I was like, yeah, it was great though.
We
Like,
had a lot of
that's a good
asterisks.
footnote to put in there, because,
Yeah.
because you're not jesting about the breakdowns because they're real, but it is, I mean, yeah, if someone's having so, I mean, we talked about this a little earlier. So yeah, I have 3 daughters. I do what I can to be a role model, and to guide them on their journeys, and you were saying that they're sort of on their path now, and I'm just here for support. But as I was reading this, and I know it's, built like a woman, but men can actually get some, good data out of this and some good advice. Would you ever recommend men reading it? Dad, did you read it?
No.
Yeah.
How many?
Yeah, I think the methodology, because it really is a 12-part method, is geared toward anyone. We've actually had a lot of men buy it. I've been very surprised by that.
Sure.
But it was more intended to allow women, because I just remember what it felt like reading all the textbooks and growing up and feeling like it was one example after the next of how some guy did it. And I think there are unique aspects to being a woman, dealing with power and the dynamics of power, dealing with, that awful phrase imposter syndrome that we've heard ad nauseum. But some of these things, there are unique gender differences. And so I just wanted to speak to them. But I absolutely like the bones of this, and the content that's in it is applicable for anyone. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. There were lots of things in here that I could think of many.
And I just want to say one thing about you. When I reached out, I think it was 6 months ago, when this was just a pipe dream, starting the tour and figuring out what to do, you immediately embraced it, and you talked about your daughters. And it was just this early vote of confidence in what I was doing. And so I just so appreciate you doing that, and for your early embrace of this book too.
Happy to have that. I believe in the power of women.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And what you write about, all the challenges that women have, when we're out there having a career, and then there's all things, and you have a whole chapter on it, things that get in the way, and there's family life, there's the stigma of being a woman. And, if you're powerful, you're considered, oh, you're just, yeah. As opposed to if the guy was doing it, they'd be like, oh, you're strong, strong. And so I loved that whole chapter on that, and it's throughout the book, but I think, and I love that your skiing analogy is like, that's a girl skiing, right?
Yeah.
I read this, the other day. So, and I was like, that was just so great. Like, yeah, I'm a girl and I could ski, and as good as you, if not better. So, would you ever consider doing like a young adult version of this, or something for younger girls?
Like, you're selling my next book to, I can hook you up with
Wonder
CAA.
Man, I got it. all.
Filled like a fill in the blank.
Exactly, you have a whole series.
Oh, yeah. I know.
I can see that,
Really?
the epiphany of, because I have a strong 14-year-old that's driven, competitive, an independent mother. And I'm gonna buy the book for her, and you're gonna write something for her. B is a little B.
Okay.
Big B's already.
Yes.
She's building,
Yeah,
and I can't wait to see who she becomes. Like,
Well, you
so-
heard it here first.
Yeah.
We're gonna do this, okay? In
yeah.
a few years, I'll be back. It'll take me about like 3 to 5 years.
Pare it down a little.
Yeah, it'll be more of a pamphlet. Yeah.
No, but I do think that, like you said, the bones of this are very relevant to anyone, and they're very accessible. The advice that you give and the steps that you give, very, very accessible ways to look at things and then tackle your dreams and go after it.
Thank you for that. It was important, my consulting work is obviously at a certain level, but I really wanted to make sure to make it as accessible and mass as possible, so that, it doesn't feel intimidating. Business shouldn't feel intimidating in the way that it does. And I think the people that come out of business schools and how unapproachable and theoretical and left brain they make it, like, it ain't that complicated, it just isn't.
Yeah. So this is a little bit of a longer question. So I want to talk about section 2 a little bit. So we've got the mindset down, and now there's the skill set, unleashing your dream. And I'm just going to paraphrase what some of the chapters are, cashing in on your business, finding your customers, positioning your brand to stand out, marketing, sales, and then making it. They're all so important, every aspect of that. But someone who, like, let's say they've got through the mindset, they're in this skill set now, and if someone said to you, where should I put most of my focus, at least starting out, do you have a recommendation for any of these areas for them to really kind of dig into when they're just getting going?
I would say first, you really need a brand. So you need, otherwise you're a commodity or a product, and the essence of a great brand, as I construct them, and you know, I've worked with Nike and Verizon and NBC Sports and the biggest brands in the world, is you have an enemy. Like you have to stand, and I think this is true of people too, like you have to stand for something in the world that is greater than who and what you are. And you have to push up against something. And you know it's good because you're going to be beloved for it, or you are going to be hated for it. There's this very polarizing thing that happens. And even in writing this book, like some people have really hated it, you know, some people have really loved it. I'm like, so my team, that's like, we're on the hunt, you know?
Sure.
So that's where I'd say to start. The other piece I would say is I think we traditionally play a little scared, and I certainly did. So I've got this concept in the book, and I think this is applicable whether you have a business or not, called outrageous asks. And I love this one so much. This is so fun. So essentially what you do is we need to make big asks in business and life. And so you take something that you want. It could be an introduction to someone. It could just be something that you're interested in. And you wage that ask, but the trick is it needs to be so wild and so crazy, and you demonstrate you are willing to do whatever it takes, go to any lengths, that the person might contort themselves to catch you. Like they might say yes, because you're almost publicly humiliating yourself. And so the first one I did, I was on a plane flying back, and I'd watched Becoming Warren Buffett. Have you guys ever seen that? It's so good. Okay, add that to your watch list for this weekend. So good. I'm flying back and I'm like, this guy's amazing. I had no idea he's a feminist, all these things. So I sent his office a note and I said, I see in this video that Mr. Buffett goes and does an Egg McMuffin drive-through in Omaha, Nebraska every morning religiously for 5 minutes. You know, can I steal 5 minutes of his day? I'll just do the drive-through with him. I'm gonna jump in the car at the beginning of the drive-through, then I'll jump out. And that's it. That's all I want. And his secretary came back to me and she said, it's a not now. It's not a never. And Mr. Buffett was so tickled by your note and couldn't believe that you would fly in for 5 minutes of time, even for this Egg McMuffin. And I've had all these unbelievable experiences where people have said yes to me because I'm saying something, I'm asking for something that is just, it's in another stratosphere. And that can catapult your business or your life. It just takes one yes to change the entire trajectory of it all.
Yeah. So how do you follow up on the Egg McMuffin?
I know, I'm gonna do it, actually. I mean, it's a good reminder. Me again.
So actually one of my questions I was gonna ask later, but so that's what Warren Buffett does. What do you do first thing in the morning? Like, what's the first thing you do every day?
So
If you want to share.
yeah, no, this was a huge game changer. So I got this in the book. There's something called the 60-minute prime. And so it's the 3 S's, it's sweat, sustenance, and silence. So I move my body in some way, shape, or form, no matter how busy or crazy the day is. I meditate. Personally, that's what works for me. But I think being able to get still and silent, going back to WB, a reactive life is a horribly painful life. And so I find that centers me because my days are so frenetic and crazy with all I'm doing. And then sustenance, just eating really clean and green. That's kind of how I manage my mornings. And then I've got a 60-minute pause that I do when something flies in, take it into my body. Is it hot, cold? Does it feel juicy? Do I want to go do it? Or is it cold, agitating, scary, not for me? And so that's also, I really trust how my body feels in making decisions. And that's a way I kind of manage my days.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. So you have to do it yourself section, which is like 40 pages, you know, so which is great. I mean, there's questions and there's drills and exercises and it's, I think, after you read the book to kind of dig in, and you recommend if you want to get another notebook to, at what point would you recommend someone do you ever recommend they do this first? Does that help spark the idea? And then part two to this question is, let's say someone does fill it out, and then they start, their business, whatever, and then some things changes. Do they go back and change their answers, or do you suggest they do it all over again? What do you feel about your do-it-yourself section? Because there's a lot there. It's very, very deep and detailed.
I fought for that.
Fabulous.
No one really wanted to do it yourself. But I wanted something that was really hardworking for people, where they got value and, could actually start to construct some of what they were learning. So it's designed, it takes 3 months, it's 12 weeks. So if you want to do it linearly, I suggest a week a chapter and doing the do-it-yourself as you go. I find it's very digestible. It's not too much. I ran a lot of people through those paces and they felt like it worked well. So yeah, that's what I would say. And if you need to go back and adjust stuff, you can. All the brands I work with they're doing this annually. It's not a one time and done, set it and forget it. It's this living, breathing document that you should keep updating and changing as you grow and your brand grows.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a couple more questions, then we'll take some audience questions. What's the best advice you've ever received?
I've been grateful to have just gotten so much good advice. I think it would be more of a concept around doing less, unlearning, allowing just myself to be who I am naturally and authentically, as opposed to, playing this role of who you think you should be, which is really exhausting. And, the majority of people, we have this in here, like at the end of your life, they're saying, I wish I'd lived a life true to myself, not the one others expected of me. And 50% of people give up on their dreams. And I think ultimately living a life that is not what Aunt Sally wants, or your niece wants, or your husband wants, or your kids want, but like wholly embracing a unique, unconventional, unorthodox life that is bespoke to you and true to you. I'd say that's the magic. The other piece of advice which Oprah gave me was to just trust the unfolding, that everything's unfolding as it's meant to. And this idea that no matter how old you are, you're just getting started. She does not believe in age, and she does not like if you mention age. And I learned that.